Right, so is the end in sight for the war of starvation being meted out on the people of Gaza? No. Unfortunately, for all the talk of an aid plan coming from the Trump administration, we do have to remember this is Donald Trump we're talking about here. A man who wants all the positive headlines, but none of the work involved to deliver. And unfortunately, he's still got those gold statues of himself first and foremost in his brain, overlooking that seafront and those Trump casinos and hotels, his vision for Gaza-Lago still dominating his mind. This is not a man who does anything for the good of humanity, only ever for himself. So when he's proposing a Gaza aid plan that Israel, for all of the weakening of the Trump-Netanyahu relationship, is broadly in support of still, we ought to be rather concerned by it. Aid may come, but it won't be enough. Who is distributing it is of massive concern too, as are other companies allegedly involved, and not to mention the use of mercenaries as well. What do you need them for to deliver aid? But most of all, the concern lies with the establishment of 4 food distribution centres to round the population of Gaza up in, to access that aid, therefore offering the choice of forced displacement to what amounts to a concentration camp, or starving to death outside of them instead. Right, so the Gaza war of starvation implemented by Benjamin Netanyahu's despotic and depraved and criminal administration in Israel is now one of the most severe humanitarian crises in modern times. The people of Gaza are being subjected to a systematic campaign of destruction, siege and starvation, now having raged on for 19 months. It is into this picture, therefore, that we have Donald Trump's proposed Gaza aid plan coming in, ostensibly designed to deliver food, medicines and relief. Any aid right now you'd figure to be most welcome, but there is of course a catch. It has been unmasked by critics and global organisations as little more than political manoeuvring, and the only thing Donald Trump has any interest in, himself. Far from addressing the needs of a desperate Gazan population, this plan is a scam, providing cover for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians to displace them to what are basically glorified concentration camps within Gaza, an enclave that had in and of itself already been labelled as the largest open-air concentration camp in the world. Trump's plan will see the walls close in drastically even further, it seems. In complete alignment with Israel still, this alleged humanitarian plan will instead weaponise this aid to displace civilians, all while still talking up compassion and security. This plan is nothing of the sort. It will bypass humanitarian norms. It seeks to militarise relief distribution and just contributes to that broader policy of containment and displacement in the Gaza Strip for Israel's benefit and not the people trapped there and starving. According to the Trump administration, the plan involves distributing food and humanitarian supplies through 4 heavily fortified distribution centres within Gaza, for which you can read concentration camp because that's what I'm reading into it. These centres are to be managed by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, a brand new NGO which has only existed since February, registered as it was in Switzerland, and is being regarded as an umbrella body for other organisations to deliver aid. In other words, it's the cover story. Trump's administration has boasted that these centres will operate independently of both the Israeli and Palestinian governments, employing private American contractors and ex-military personnel to ensure security and neutrality, inverted commas. The bits hiding under that umbrella, you might say, or at least alongside it, but more on them in a moment. On the surface, you might be thinking at this point, well, at least aid is getting into Gaza, isn't it? Does that not matter most of all? But dig a bit further and deep ethical, logistical and strategic flaws start to become readily apparent, bringing it all into question. Key international humanitarian bodies like the United Nations, UNICEF and the Norwegian Refugee Council have denounced the plan for violating fundamental humanitarian principles, humanity, impartiality, independence and neutrality. One of the central concerns revolves around the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation itself. Formed out of nowhere just a few weeks ago, the GHF operating model has been likened to that of a military contractor, not a relief organisation. According to the Swiss newspaper Le Temps, GHF has publicly advertised positions for mercenaries under the guise of food security operatives. The organisation's goals are presented in sanitised language, providing food and safety. However, critics argue that the GHF is less interested in saving lives and more focused on delivering Trump's plans, herding Gazans into predetermined zones where they can be easily monitored and potentially relocated or expelled from, ethnically cleansing Gaza as both Israel and Trump have long wanted. It's Trump plan stipulates that all Gazans seeking aid must physically enter one of 4 distribution centres, which will serve as the safe zones, inverted commas. However, these centres will be surrounded by US private contractors, armed, of course, with tight surveillance systems in place as well. Entry into these zones comes at the cost of freedom, dignity and autonomy. Even starving Gazans are saying you would have to be completely insane to step 1 foot inside one of these militarised compounds being run by mercenaries, not in their interests, but in the interests of Trump and the IDF. To all intents and purposes, these centres therefore are little more than concentration camps, surely. Not merely in their function as containment areas, but in their broader political aim as well. By making aid contingent on physical relocation, the plan coerces the population to move into isolated enclaves, even more isolated than the one they already exist in, which some critics argue is an initial step in a long-term displacement strategy designed to facilitate the depopulation of Gaza, and clearly the Gazan people aren't being fooled by this either. The tactic echoes past Israeli proposals to segregate and concentrate Gazan civilian population, as observed by the creation of supposed safe zones and sectors of Gaza being walled off by IDF-built corridors like Netzarim, which cross the middle of the strip now, cutting Gaza in two. These Israeli concepts of forced displacement into controlled smaller areas have now been repackaged and rebranded as humanitarian innovation instead by the Trump administration. But it's all the same plan again, isn't it? The United Nations has, as a result of this, been even more abundantly obvious, explicitly rejecting the US plan, refusing to participate in it as well. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the OCHA, and UNICEF have both slammed the plan as being non-compliant with international law even. It is, after all, one of the core tenets of humanitarian aid that aid must never be conditional on relocation, must never be militarised, or ever be used for political coercion. Yet, here we are. Despite this, the Trump administration announced that it will bypass the UN entirely, pushing forward with its aid programme regardless of international condemnation. Sod what they have to say. Senior officials have even issued threats against the UN, including withholding funds. Oh, you're going to love this one. Withholding funds from organisations like the World Food Programme if they don't get on board. So in other words, the Trump administration says back our plan to feed Gaza, or we'll cut funding to starve even more people around the world. Yeah, make that one make sense. Sure, this is humanitarian without any catches then, isn't it, Donny? Yeah, and your complexion is all natural as well, isn't it? But even if you were to take Trump's word at face value, this plan still fails from just a logistical standpoint. Currently, 750 trucks per day are needed to meet Gaza's immediate food and medical needs, according to UN estimates. The Trump plan, however, only provisions 60 trucks daily, which is less than 10% of what is required. So in another show of Trumpian mathematical failure then, they claim that they'll only be able to feed 60% of Gaza's population to begin with, already a failure, means they are effectively admitting their plan will abandon 800,000 civilians to starvation. But you don't even feed 60% off of the supply that will only meet 10% of need. This itself may actually be intentional, though. A deliberate strategy. Instead of feeding all of the hungry, the Trump plan creates competition. A race to be fed, even if Gazans go willingly to the distribution centres. Coercion to drive compliance amongst those most desperate to hurry things up. Adding to the unease of the private companies enlisted to operate the centres. Coming back to that point I raised earlier on. 2 of these are particularly notable. Safe Reach Solutions, which is itself only a couple months older than GHF, which was founded by the former head of the CIA's Centre for Special Activities, and UG Solutions, which was founded by Jameson Gavoni, a retired US Special Forces officer. With backgrounds like that, the Trump plan is positively screaming covert surveillance, psychological operations and paramilitary enforcement in a plan that we're all supposed to believe is all about humanitarian aid. Their involvement raises perfectly valid concerns that the aid centres will double as intelligence gathering and population control hubs, where civilian behaviour is monitored and used to inform broader security and displacement policies to benefit Israel, and reinforcing that concentration camp comparison. Little wonder, therefore, that Israel has officially endorsed what Trump has offered. Foreign Minister Gideon Saar has said we're fully behind it, but it isn't unanimous support. Bezalel Smotrich still wants to see Gaza destroyed, and as for Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir criticised the decision to resume humanitarian aid to Gaza, calling it a moral and strategic mistake. He urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and cabinet members to reverse the move, stating, "It is foolishness and a moral and strategic mistake for Gaza to get supplies while our hostages are starved. The equation must be clear. Want humanitarian aid? Release our hostages." Since when have you ever put the hostages first, sunshine? You literally resigned from government over a ceasefire that saw many of your hostages released, and only returned to government when Netanyahu collapsed that ceasefire, ending hostage releases, you absolute balloon. Despite the apparent souring of relations between Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, this agreement on this aid scam, when Israel have literally blocked aid for weeks to Gaza, swearing not to let a single grain enter, surely makes it obvious that all is not as they would have us believe. UNICEF has issued stern warnings about the impact on children in Gaza, particularly the war of starvation on Gaza, putting the lives of some 296,000 children at risk, stating that the plan will increase suffering of children by making aid harder to access and conditional on dangerous travel. The Norwegian Refugee Council echoed those concerns, calling the aid scheme a dystopian policy wrapped in humanitarian rhetoric. Further red flags include reports that Israel may blockade deliveries entirely depending on political developments. So if Netanyahu and Trump's apparent fallout worsens, Israel may yet undermine what little aid does get in. Since Israel still controls Gaza's borders and airspaces, any aid convoy, even American-led, could be halted, making the entire operation functionally useless, even as a displacement tool. And who'd imagine Netanyahu wouldn't do this if he keeps getting slighted, preposterous little madman that he is? The Trump aid plan is not just ethically dubious, it is likely illegal under international law. The Geneva Conventions prohibit the use of humanitarian aid as a means of warfare or coercion. Forcing civilians to relocate to receive food and militarizing that process, even loosely under US corporate militarism or through use of mercenaries, constitutes a war crime under international statutes. But that's the US that we're talking about, isn't it? When will they ever be held for account for such things? But in what amounts to another cruel blow for Gaza, therefore, the aid plan, functionally, therefore, is just another scam. Not only in intent, but in how it's going to be executed. It offers little relief, imposes massive burdens, lays the groundwork for long-term ethnic restructuring, it cloaks militarized containment under the language of compassion. The Trump administration's Gaza aid plan has got to be rejected outright and replaced with a neutral, internationally supervised relief operation led by UN agencies. Leave UNRWA in charge of it, they are the best place to do so. And unaccountable NGOs that aren't just what appear to be a glorified shell company to hide mercenary and state interventionist bodies operating for a completely different agenda, as would appear to be the case where it comes to the GHF. This is a politically militarized trap to further subjugate a suffering people, and we all need to recognise it as such. The people of Gaza need food, shelter and medical care. They've suffered enough. What they don't need is biometric checkpoints, armed contractors and relocation threats, and above all else they deserve their land back and a chance to rebuild their lives on it in peace. The one silver lining around all of this is how things may benefit the people of Gaza as relations continue to degrade between Netanyahu and Trump. And certainly doing a peace deal with the Houthis that leaves Israel on its own behind Israel's back goes a heck of a long way towards that. Maybe. There's a lot more going on I need to cover in this respect, but get all the detail of the Houthi side of the story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to spread the word about this and help support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers folks.